Picture a frontier town on the brink of chaos where a tyrannical mayor forces a young woman to the altar, only for a fierce Lakota war chief to burst into the church, arrow-notched, vowing to halt the ceremony. Is he friend or foe? What secrets lie behind the mayor's power? And why would a Lakota leader risk everything to stop this wedding? These questions ignite a chain of events that transforms both the town and the tribe, forging alliances in the face of railroad ambitions and land grabs. The stakes climb higher with each choice. Curious how it unfolds and whether this daring intervention truly sets the stage for peace or plunges everyone into deeper danger. Stick around for the full story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heart-stirring, unpredictable tales. Your support keeps these frontier dramas alive, so stay with us to discover every twist. The year was 1868 when Estelle Cantrell found herself standing before the altar in Riverbend's single modest church. Trembling fingers wrapped around a wilted bouquet of prairie blossoms. She felt the curious and pitying stares of the townsfolk pressed in behind her. Not because they truly wanted to witness her wedding, but because Mayor Everett Stone had insisted on a full congregation. By his decree, the pews were filled with those too frightened to refuse. Clutching her bouquet, Estelle tried not to look at her husband-to-be, a powerful, unyielding figure nearly twice her age, rumored to have buried two previous wives under suspicious circumstances. For Estelle, this was not a day of celebration, but an outcome she had seen no way to avoid. Months earlier, she never imagined she would end up in Riverbend at all. She had journeyed west with her beloved brother Robert, both orphans from Philadelphia seeking a fresh start. Their wagon broke down just outside the settlement. What was meant to be a brief stop for axle repairs turned into weeks when Robert fell ill with a fever. Riverbend's outward signs of prosperity, a bustling trade post along the Missouri River, complete with a schoolhouse and well-kept boardwalks, had given them hope. Yet beneath this veneer, Mayor Stone ruled like a self-appointed monarch, collecting heavy taxes and controlling the local law through fear. When Robert died, despite the best efforts of Dr. Fowler, Riverbend's only physician, Estelle found herself alone with minimal savings and no place to go. She took employment at Palmer's General Store, run by the ailing widow. Mrs. Palmer, who warned Estelle from the start, Everett Stone notices every newcomer. Dear, watch yourself, true to prediction. The mayor began frequent visits, flaunting his influence. He arrived under trivial pretenses, buying small items or offering condolences. Then came the gifts he insisted on bestowing upon Estelle: lace gloves, a book of poems, and an eventual invitation to dine at his imposing house on the hill. Mrs. Palmer was direct: be careful around him. He's not a man who hears no. Estelle went to Reverend Campbell for guidance, but he was too intimidated by Stone to offer any real help. Eventually, the mayor revealed his true intentions. He held the debt on Palmer's store and threatened foreclosure if Estelle refused his hand. Cornered, she saw no option but to comply. If only to spare Mrs. Palmer from destitution. Preparations for the wedding were rushed. Sheriff Dalton Stone's loyal enforcer escorted Estelle everywhere, ensuring she couldn't flee. In the claustrophobic days before the ceremony, she was confined to a locked bedroom in Stone's mansion. Each night she lay awake imagining some miracle that would free her. On the wedding morning, wearing a gown Stone had purchased from St. Louis months ago, as though he'd planned to ensnare any suitable woman who crossed his path, Estelle walked down the aisle with Sheriff Dalton at her side. The crowd avoided her eyes. If anyone pitied her, they kept it hidden. Mayor Stone stood at the altar, outwardly pleased, though his forced smile looked more like a triumphant sneer. Reverend Campbell cleared his throat to begin the service, his voice wavering. Yet before he could finish the opening prayer, the church doors banged open. Sunlight poured in, silhouetting a tall man wearing a feathered headdress, bow in hand, accompanied by fellow warriors. He was Rising Hawk, a respected war chief of the nearby Lakota camp. Glancing at the bride's trembling form, his voice rang out in perfect English. This wedding ends now. Pandemonium seized the small church in Riverbend as Rising Hawk's proclamation echoed against the wooden walls. Sheriff Dalton, standing near the front, reflexively reached for his revolver, but froze when a dozen arrows were aimed at him, each drawn by the Lakota warriors who had entered alongside their chief mayor. Stone, momentarily speechless, recovered enough to bark, "How dare you interrupt a lawful ceremony?" He tried to maintain his commanding stance, but the shock in the congregation's eyes revealed an unprecedented challenge to his power. Estelle's heart thundered. She hadn't met Rising Hawk personally, but she knew of him through whispered anecdotes that he had once guided trappers safely through winter storms, that he was fiercely protective of his people. No one had said he spoke such flawless English, or that he held such boldness to disrupt a mayor's edict. She caught the flicker of compassion in his gaze as he looked at her white-knuckled grip on the bouquet. Rising Hawk then addressed the startled Reverend. "If this woman is being forced, we will not stand by." Mayor Stone let out a derisive snort. He advanced a step, taking Estelle's wrist in a punishing grip. She consented freely. He insisted, though his tight grasp said otherwise. "Tell them, Estelle." His eyes flared with warning, implying dire consequences if she contradicted him. And yet in that decisive moment, Estelle found the courage that had eluded her. She spoke up, her voice trembling, but resolute. "No, I did not. I've been coerced." The tension escalated in an instant. Stone's grip tightened. Rising Hawk stepped closer, towering over the mayor, unwavering in the face of potential violence. Meanwhile, Dr. Fowler rose from his pew, voice quiet but firm. "We've all known about your methods, Stone. Enough blood has already stained this town." Some nodded while others avoided Stone's furious glare. Stone snapped at Sheriff Dalton to arrest the Lakota on sight, but Dalton hesitated, counting the many arrows aimed at him. He also noticed the congregation's shifting mood. This wasn't the usual spat that Stone could bully his way through. Watching from the sidelines, Mrs. Palmer stood with tears in her eyes. She had guessed the mayor's plan, but never expected an intervention from outside. Others, like Reverend Campbell, appeared conflicted, torn between loyalty to local authority and the moral truth unfolding. Meanwhile, Rising Hawk's warriors held their ground calm, but ready to loose arrows if Stone or Dalton fired a single shot. Mayor Stone attempted one last show of authority, yanking Estelle forward. "She's my betrothed," he snarled, "and no savage war chief is going to." He never finished. In a fluid motion, Rising Hawk seized Stone's wrist, releasing Estelle from the mayor's painful grip. Before Stone could react, a young Lakota woman, Evening Star, slipped through the church doors, hurling a short knife that struck the wall just beside Stone's head, an unmistakable warning. "Touch her again," she said in halting English. "And you die." Gasps swept through the pews. Stone's face paled even as he hurled curses. But from the set of Rising Hawk's jaw to the unwavering aim of the Lakota warriors, it was clear the mayor no longer held uncontested power in Riverbend. The upheaval in Riverbend did not end with the disrupted wedding. After Mayor Stone was disarmed, Sheriff Dalton, now in an impossible position, faced a critical choice: obey the mayor's long-standing threats or fulfill his sworn duty. He chose the latter to Stone's utter disbelief. "I can't let you keep harming folks," Dalton muttered, securing the mayor's pistol. Murmurs spread among the townsfolk, and for the first time Stone found his iron rule slipping. As neighbors he had bullied realized they weren't alone. At Rising Hawk's insistence, Estelle was allowed to leave the church unharmed, flanked by 2 Lakota warriors. The crowd parted to let them pass, and uncertainty in every expression. Dr. Fowler hurried after them, calling for calm, while Reverend Campbell, rattled by the day's events, offered a makeshift prayer for peace. Evening Star, the young Lakota woman who had thrown the knife, stayed close to Estelle, her posture protective. Though her English was limited, she managed to convey that Rising Hawk had come specifically upon hearing rumors that the mayor forced a marriage and had torched a Lakota winter encampment by the river's bend. The realization that Stone had orchestrated a violent move against the local Lakota band ignited new outrage. Many had not been aware of the details, just that Stone's men had run off a few troublemakers. In truth, he'd seized their horses, burned their teepees, and destroyed supplies, all while the Lakota hunters were away. Rising Hawk declared that such aggression broke treaties the band had established with earlier settlers. He demanded justice not only for Estelle, but for his displaced people. Before the day was out, a makeshift council convened in Mrs. Palmer's store, which was one of the few sizable indoor spaces besides the church. Fowler, Sheriff Dalton, and a handful of respected townsfolk sat alongside Rising Hawk and 2 Lakota elders attempting a civil discussion. Estelle was there too, drawn by the sense that her own story was now intimately tied to that of these native warriors. The meeting was tense. Stone's shadow loomed large, but the mayor himself was confined in Dalton's small jail, raging at any poor soul who passed by. It was in that gathering that Dr. Fowler explained in hushed tones how Stone had likely caused the death of his second wife, controlling every aspect of her life before she fell down the stairs. He also admitted treating bruises and broken bones on several locals who had defied the mayor in the past. The Lakota elders, hearing this, exchanged grim looks. "Such a man cannot be allowed to lead," said one. His voice translated through Rising Hawk's fluent English. Sheriff Dalton agreed, resigned to what he should have done long ago. We'll hold him under arrest. The territorial judge can determine his fate. A hush fell as the conversation turned to the burned Lakota camp and the stolen horses. Rising Hawk produced a weathered piece of parchment, a treaty affirming hunting rights and free passage along the Missouri River. Your mayor broke this. We have hunted these lands for generations. He tried to drive us away by violence and fear. Estelle spoke, finding a renewed strength in the face of this communal upheaval. I've seen what Stone was willing to do to one woman. I can only imagine the force he'd use on an entire camp. Her admission of captivity and forced engagement rang with honesty, moving some townsfolk to tears. The newly awakened spirit in Riverbend recognized a crossroads. Either stand with Stone's tyranny or forge a more just path, even if it meant uneasy cooperation with people they barely understood. By nightfall, Riverbend felt transformed. Townsfolk whispered in small knots along the boardwalks, no longer sure that obeying Mayor Stone's every word was in their best interest. Those who had once feared him realized they were part of a majority. The presence of Rising Hawk and his Lakota warriors, while unsettling to some, also represented a tangible stand against oppression. Sheriff Dalton, steadied by the unexpected unity he was experiencing, instructed 2 deputies to keep watch over the jail, where Stone now sat fuming. Estelle, meanwhile, found herself a reluctant hero in some eyes. People approached her outside the store, offering timid thanks for speaking up about Stone's coercion. Mrs. Palmer hugged her tearfully. If I'd known how far it had gone, I would have found a way to stop it, she whispered. Yet Estelle knew the storekeeper had done what she could under Stone's intimidating watch. Sometimes the only way to break free of oppression was for many voices to rise at once. At Rising Hawk's prompting, the Lakota put forth specific demands. They wanted immediate acknowledgement that Stone's land claims near the river had been fraudulent. They required compensation for the stolen horses and for a promise that no future mayor of Riverbend would repeat Stone's aggression. The locals, fearful of retribution from a larger Lakota alliance, were surprisingly open to the idea of paying for the horses and formally renouncing Stone's territorial overreach. Still, the conversation grew fraught when the topic of the railroad came up. It emerged that Stone had also been courting a railway company, boasting that he could clear any native obstacles to the tracks that would soon cross the region. In truth, Stone had staked claims across the northern route, anticipating a fortune from the sale of prime lands once the railroad arrived. He planned to drive out your people forcibly or otherwise. Dr. Fowler admitted to Rising Hawk. The war chief's jaw tightened at the revelation, but he merely nodded, focusing on what to do next rather than seething over old injustices. Meanwhile, Estelle tried to process her own future. Now that she was free, what remained in Riverbend for her? She had a job at Palmer's store, but her brother's passing and her ordeal with Stone had scarred the place in her memory. Swift, quiet changes in her perspective made her uncertain. Rising Hawk and Evening Star noticed her restlessness. What will you do now? Rising Hawk asked, voice level. She hesitated. I'm not sure. I never intended to settle in Riverbend long term. In truth, she felt adrift, grateful to the Lakota for rescuing her from forced marriage, yet unsure how to repay them, or whether she truly belonged among them. Her gaze drifted to Evening Star, who studied her with the same calm seriousness. The young Lakota woman said softly, You showed kindness before. We do not forget, Doctor. Fowler, overhearing, pointed out that Estelle was well-educated. She might consider teaching in the newly established schoolhouse. But a flicker of something more adventurous glimmered in her thoughts, bridging the gap between Riverbend and the Lakota, possibly traveling with them to learn their ways, then returning to teach others in the settlement about real coexistence. Rising Hawk's talk of rightful land usage and old treaties stirred her sense of justice, and she realized that education might be more than reading and writing. It could be about forging a path to understanding. As midnight approached, the makeshift council agreed to reconvene at first light. They would plan how to negotiate a stable future for the Lakota in the area, especially regarding the railroad. Estelle retired to the small spare room in Mrs. Palmer's home, no longer the locked bedroom of Stone's house, and tried to rest. Sleep eluded her, for she was haunted by the morning's dramatic rescue and all that had followed. The next day, she suspected, might set the course for both her fate and the fate of Riverbend. The new day dawned with a hum of anticipation across Riverbend. The townspeople who had cowered for so long under Mayor Stone's rule began to emerge from their fear. Outside the jailhouse, a dozen curious onlookers milled about, half expecting Stone's loyalists to stage some desperate gambit, yet none arrived to champion him. They had vanished into the shadows as soon as they realized the majority no longer stood behind him. Sheriff Dalton and two deputies kept watch, determined to see justice done. At Mrs. Palmer's store, Estelle woke early to the smell of coffee and fresh cornbread. Rising Hawk and his companions had camped outside town in a meadow, reluctant to accept lodging in a settlement that had so recently harmed their people. By the time Estelle finished dressing and stepped onto the boardwalk, she saw Lakota warriors moving about in quiet confidence, exchanging wary greetings with locals who ventured close. Something was changing here, an openness to conversation, albeit tinged with caution. Inside the store, Mrs. Palmer and Dr. Fowler stood over a makeshift map. They were joined by two local ranchers, each eager to see how future negotiations might stabilize land boundaries. "We can't keep chasing the Lakota away," one rancher admitted. "Half our water sources run across land that's rightfully theirs." Dr. Fowler nodded. Glancing at Estelle, "Perhaps we need an agreement, one that respects the Lakota hunting routes and ensures Riverbend's future prosperity." Mayor Stone's approach of sheer intimidation was never sustainable. Rising Hawk entered quietly, taking note of the conversation. He waited for the talk to pause before speaking. "My band does not seek revenge for the burning of our camp. We seek to ensure it never happens again. Some propose shared trade, open lines of communication. But we must also talk about the railroad. Rumors swirl that it will come soon, ignoring old treaties." A hush fell, for this was the hinge on which all hopes balanced. The iron tracks threatened everything from farmland claims to the Lakota's migratory hunts. Sheriff Dalton arrived to announce that Judge Barlow would be traveling from a neighboring county in a week's time to hold a proper hearing for Stone's crimes. Until then, the mayor would remain jailed. The mention of Stone's name caused the room to go tense, but soon attention returned to the future. If the railroad representatives decided to run tracks through the Lakota's remaining lands, conflict seemed inevitable. Estelle felt a surge of determination. Although uncertain about her place, she stepped forward. "Mayor Stone tried to remove me from the conversation by force," she said, voice steady. "But thanks to Rising Hawk, I stand here free. The Lakota protected me when no one else could. That alone makes me want to help. Maybe I can be of use teaching them our language, bridging discussions with the railroad officials. We can't rely on old prejudices to vanish by themselves." Mrs. Palmer put a hand on Estelle's shoulder. "You're serious about living among them, aren't you?" she asked softly. "At least for a time," Estelle replied. "I want to understand truly, and someone needs to carry messages back and forth if these negotiations are to work." She glanced at Rising Hawk, who inclined his head in agreement. Though Evening Star was also fluent enough in English to get by, they all sensed that a white teacher bridging the two cultures might diffuse tensions. A new hush fell as the group realized the magnitude of her offer. Dr. Fowler, eyebrows lifted, said gently, "Miss Cantrell, that won't be a small endeavor. Some townspeople already suspect you have gone native just from yesterday's events. Plunging fully into Lakota life will stir talk." Estelle exhaled slowly. "They can talk. If it prevents future harm, like the burning of that winter camp, maybe it's worth it, or at least it's worth trying." Discussions in Mrs. Palmer's store evolved into an impromptu council that lasted well into the afternoon. Ranchers, a few merchants, and the more open-minded townsfolk took turns airing concerns. Could the Lakota guarantee safe passage for wagons on the outskirts? Would Riverbend commit to fair trade instead of stonewalling them? Rising Hawk, patient yet firm, explained that mutual respect had existed in earlier years before Stone's tyranny. If they reestablished that tradition, neither side had reason to fear. Estelle found herself acting as an informal mediator whenever the language barrier or cultural misunderstandings arose. She noticed how deftly Rising Hawk navigated the conversation, never promising subservience but offering cooperation where it benefited both sides. Evening Star contributed as well, clarifying certain Lakota customs or references to old treaties. The hour grew late before they adjourned, deciding to draft a written agreement to present once Judge Barlow arrived. As dusk fell, Estelle accompanied Rising Hawk and Evening Star to the small meadow where the Lakota visitors had pitched their temporary camp. A single cooking fire crackled, reflecting on the stern faces of the warriors. They ate dried meat and a stew that Evening Star had made from local herbs. In the flickering light, Estelle noticed the quiet confidence these men exuded despite being outnumbered in a town that had proven hostile under Stone's rule. Rising Hawk remarked, "We will soon return to our main camp. Our people must know we found support here, but also a deeper threat from the railroad." Estelle's heart clenched at the mention of the railroad. The more she learned, the more certain she felt that outside interests could undermine local peace faster than any internal agreement. She had overheard rumors that Stone's associates in the capital were pushing to sell large tracts of Lakota land. Even if Stone was dethroned, the juggernaut of expansion was unstoppable. Riverbend might be a small piece of a much larger chessboard. At length, Rising Hawk asked, "You wish to come with us, Estelle Cantrell, into our world?" Evening Star nodded encouragingly. Estelle held her breath. "I do," she said. "I can't just remain in town after everything that's happened. And if I can teach your children to read or help communicate with those railroad agents, maybe that's the best help I can offer." A ghost of a smile touched Rising Hawk's normally serious lips. "Your decision is brave. Our band moves often with the changing seasons. We have endured hardships, and the winter hunts can be harsh, but you will be among friends." That evening, she packed a small trunk at Mrs. Palmer's store, gathering her meager possessions, which included a few books Robert had treasured, spare clothes, and the little money left to her name. Mrs. Palmer tried to hide her worry. "Dear child, no one from Riverbend has ever done this," she murmured. "Living with a Lakota by choice." "Are you certain?" Estelle nodded, voice quiet but resolute. "I'm no child, and I don't belong here anymore. The only time I felt truly free was after Rising Hawk intervened. Now I want to learn who they really are beyond the rumors." The next morning, she mounted a borrowed horse, her trunk secured to a pack animal, and followed Rising Hawk, Evening Star, and the other Lakota warriors as they departed. Riverbend townspeople watched with mixed emotions. Some offered subdued goodbyes, while a few muttered about betrayal. Sheriff Dalton wished her well, promising to keep an eye on Stone's case in the looming railroad negotiations. Dr. Fowler pressed a small medical kit into her hands, saying he hoped it might help if she encountered any troubles. The ride out of Riverbend felt surreal. She glanced over her shoulder, seeing the outline of the church steeple fading in the distance, recalling how that building had nearly been her prison of marriage. No more. She spurred the horse onward, following the Lakota riders as they wove into the rolling expanse of grasslands and cottonwood groves. The land itself seemed to beckon her forward, a quiet invitation to discover a broader, more profound way of life, a life shaped by cycles of nature and ancient traditions. Estelle's first few days among the Lakota tested her endurance and adaptability. The band's main camp lay 2 days' ride from Riverbend, situated near a riverbend overshadowed by tall cottonwoods. Unlike the rigid grid of the frontier settlement, the camp seemed to flow organically with the landscape teepees arranged in a gentle arc facing the morning sun, each belonging to a family unit whose members bustled about daily tasks. Newcomers eyed Estelle with curiosity and occasional suspicion. Rising Hawk introduced her formally to Chief Ironcloud, his father, whose weathered face spoke of decades spent guiding their people. During the first evening council, Ironcloud welcomed Estelle's presence but challenged her intentions. Through Rising Hawk's translation, the chief said, "We have seen white teachers who come only to point out our ignorance and force their ways on us. Are you different?" Estelle's cheeks warmed. "I hope so," she replied earnestly, waiting for Rising Hawk to convey her words. "I don't want to force anything. I'm here to learn your ways and to share mine, only if you wish it." Her sincerity seemed to impress the elders, for they included her in the communal meal that followed a stew of venison and beans. Daily life in the camp required Estelle to set aside the structured routine she had known in Riverbend. She helped gather firewood, learning to differentiate the best kindling from green smoky logs. Evening Star, Rising Hawk's younger sister, guided Estelle through the tasks of preparing buffalo hides and tanning deer leather chores. Estelle had never dreamed of doing back east. Though she fumbled at first, the other women teased her kindly, showing her where to hold the scraping tool and how to stretch the hide efficiently. In return, Estelle offered to teach English to anyone interested, not just children. A few young adults curious about the language used in government treaties eagerly came to her for lessons. She used a battered textbook she'd salvaged from Riverbend's old schoolhouse, pointing to pictures and letters, forging a rudimentary curriculum. Rising Hawk occasionally stopped by, quietly watching the sessions from a distance, perhaps gauging her progress or simply ensuring she felt safe. At night, Estelle curled up in a small teepee loaned to her by an elderly widow who had family in another band. Sounds of Lakota lullabies, muffled conversations, and rustling grass lulled her to a sleep deeper than any she'd experienced in her old room at Mrs. Palmer's store. The sky overhead felt impossibly vast, untainted by the smoky lamps of any settlement. Within a week, she found her body adjusting to the circadian rhythm of dawn and dusk, her mind awakening to a slower, more grounded pace. She soon discovered that Dr. Fowler's gifted medical kit was invaluable. The camp had a healer, White Flower, whose knowledge of natural remedies was immense, but who struggled to read the labels on Dr. Fowler's bottles, with Rising Hawk translating. Estelle explained each medicine's usage, painkillers, antiseptics, and so forth. White Flower in turn showed Estelle which local herbs treated fevers and burns. It was a remarkable exchange of knowledge, bridging a gap formed by decades of mistrust. Yet tension simmered beneath the camp's surface. Men scouted the perimeter daily, wary of cavalry patrols. Rumors drifted in of other Lakota bands being forced off prime hunting grounds by soldiers enforcing new railroad charters. Each snippet of news put the community on edge, worried that the same might happen here. When Estelle asked if she should return to Riverbend to gather updates, Ironcloud suggested waiting until a formal message arrived. Traveling alone is dangerous, he cautioned, rising. Hawk assured her that for now, the best help she could offer was simply to integrate learning the language and continuing her school so that when negotiations inevitably resumed, she could speak with credibility for both sides. Weeks passed in a rhythm of shared labor and subdued caution. Estelle's Lakota vocabulary grew day by day, aided by daily conversations with Evening Star, who found the exchange delightful. The language was melodic and often nuanced with single words, representing concepts that English demanded entire sentences to convey. Estelle's initial clumsy attempts drew laughter from the children, but her persistence and sincerity gradually earned her respect. One crisp morning, she was collecting wild onions by the riverside with Evening Star when Rising Hawk approached on horseback, his expression grim. He had returned early from a scouting trip. There are rumors from the west, he said, dismounting. The army has established a new fort along Bridger's Trail, pushing more tribes off their lands. I fear they may set their sights on us soon. The unsettled feeling that had hung over the camp deepened, and Estelle noticed Evening Star's anxious glance. That afternoon, Chief Ironcloud called a council. The elders deliberated whether to remain in their current location where water and game were still abundant, or move deeper into the hills away from potential cavalry patrols. Some younger warriors, emboldened by the knowledge that Stone's intimidation had been overcome in Riverbend, argued for standing ground. Others cautioned that a direct confrontation with the army would be far deadlier than any showdown with the mayor's hired guns. Rising Hawk, balancing tradition with reality, advised vigilance, but also recommended continuing the negotiations begun with Riverbend. If we have local allies, he said, we stand stronger when outside forces press in. Estelle found herself quietly included in these discussions. Although she lacked the depth of cultural understanding the elders had, she could relay what she knew of the broader political climate, how the territorial government often bowed to railroad interests, how public sentiment shaped whether treaties were honored or discarded. Her insights gleaned from her short time in Riverbend and her earlier life in eastern cities resonated with Ironcloud. He concluded the council by stating that an emissary should travel soon to Riverbend, or even to the capital accompanied by a translator. All eyes then shifted toward Estelle. In the hush that followed, she hesitated. A trip back to Riverbend meant facing the fact that many in the settlement might see her as a traitor or curiosity, yet the cause was greater than personal discomfort. If she could deliver the Lakota perspective clearly, perhaps further tragedies could be averted. Evening Star squeezed her hand in silent encouragement. Rising Hawk's steady gaze conveyed confidence in her ability. Chief Ironcloud finally spoke. Estelle Cantrell, you have walked among us as a friend. You understand the ways of your people, and now glimpse ours. Will you speak on our behalf to those who hold this territory's fate in their hands? Nodding, she answered with a mix of resolve and fear. I will go, but I'll need help, someone from among you, to show we stand united. Ironcloud conferred with Rising Hawk. My son will accompany you, the chief decided. It will show our seriousness. The war chief accepted the assignment without hesitation. Plans were made to depart at dawn. A small party of 4, Estelle, Rising Hawk, and 2 experienced warriors to ensure safety on the road. That night, as Estelle tried to rest, questions swirled in her mind. Would Riverbend truly stand by the new alliance if the railroad or the army pressed for complete control of Lakota lands? Would her presence be enough to sway hearts, or was she merely delaying the inevitable? Her journal, in which she scribbled her evolving reflections, lay open pages half filled with Lakota words she had learned. She sensed that the next journey would be critical not just for the Lakota's survival, but for her own sense of purpose. They set out at dawn, the Lakota sunrise painting the sky in vivid pink and gold above the dew-kissed grass. The travel party consisted of Estelle, Rising Hawk, and 2 warriors known as Stone Bear and Cloud Runner. each adept at navigating the prairies. Estelle rode a sturdy mare provided by Evening Star, who waved goodbye with a mixture of confidence and longing. She parted with a whispered hope, "Return safe, we stand or fall together." The path to Riverbend took them past the charred remains of an old winter encampment, a reminder of how quickly violence could erupt. Rising Hawk pointed to scorched poles and blackened earth. "Everett Stone's doing," he said quietly, referencing the old mayor, now locked up in the jail, though Stone's personal tyranny was over. His legacy of hostility lingered. Estelle felt a wave of anger. How many families had lost everything to gratify one man's greed? They avoided well-trodden roads to minimize unwanted encounters, though the occasional sign of cavalry patrol hoofprints in muddy creek beds, recently extinguished campfires put them on alert. One midday, they passed a worn trapper's cabin where an old man dozed on the porch. He woke startled by the Lakota warriors, but relaxed when he recognized Estelle's face from Riverbend. He mumbled about surveyors roaming the hills, talking of big changes, and shook his head in dismay, rising. Hawk slipped him a small pouch of dried meat, a gesture that earned a toothless grin of gratitude. When they finally glimpsed Riverbend's outlines from a hilltop, Estelle noticed fresh signs of development. The blacksmith's new addition glinted in the sun. A partly constructed warehouse rose near the old wharf. The settlement was steadily growing, shaped by trade and the promise of that forthcoming railroad. Approaching town, the group drew stares, but less alarmed than during Rising Hawk's first dramatic appearance. Word had apparently spread that alliances were changing. Sheriff Dalton met them at the edge of the main street, tipping his hat in acknowledgement. Dalton quickly led them to the recently completed town hall, a wooden structure erected after Stone's downfall. Inside, a small group awaited Judge Barlow, who had arrived earlier to handle the trial. Mayor Griffith, Stone's elected replacement, Dr. Fowler, and a few influential townspeople. Though they eyed the armed Lakota warriors warily, Judge Barlow cleared his throat. Stepping forward, "Miss Cantrell, we've heard rumors of your new role. Are you acting as an official translator?" Estelle nodded, exchanging a glance with Rising Hawk. "Yes, for Chief Ironcloud's band. We come in peace to discuss events that concern us all, especially the rumored shift in the railroad plan." The moment she spoke those words, tension prickled the room. Barlow explained that a letter from the territorial capital stated the railroad might indeed move north, ignoring local agreements. As Estelle translated the gist of Barlow's explanation for Rising Hawk, the war chief's face hardened. Stone Bear and Cloud Runner exchanged grim looks. "Once again, they break promises." Rising Hawk said, tone clipped, "Our people have compromised, and still we are pushed aside." Dr. Fowler tried to ease the moment. "We're not all in favor of that new route, war chief. Many of us think the southern path is best, but powerful men in the capital don't always listen to smaller voices." Rising, Hawk folded his arms. "Small voices become large when joined. The Lakota do not want war, but we will not starve for someone else's profit." Dalton agreed carefully, noting the possibility of stoking local support for the Lakota. They discussed the need for a formal petition to the territorial governor, demanding respect for earlier treaties. "We must move swiftly," Estelle urged, "or construction crews will push forward, forcing a confrontation." At last it was decided the following day, Barlow would hold an open hearing for Stone's crimes, then finalize a petition that Lakota representatives and townsfolk alike could sign. After that, a delegation, possibly including Estelle and Rising Hawk, would journey to the capital to deliver their message in person. "It's a risk," Barlow said gravely, "but perhaps the only way to make them hear us." The day of Mayor Everett Stone's trial arrived like a storm, though the sky overhead was clear. Curious crowds assembled outside Riverbend's town hall early, including ranchers, shopkeepers, and families with children too young to recall a time before Stone's rule. Under the watchful eyes of Stone Bear and Cloud Runner, Rising Hawk and Estelle took seats near the front. Stone himself, escorted by deputies, radiated venomous anger. He glowered at Estelle the moment he saw her, but said nothing, perhaps realizing no one would heed his threats. Now Judge Barlow, a graying man with an unassuming demeanor, proceeded calmly. Witness after witness described Stone's coercion, land fraud, and intimidation tactics. Dr. Fowler recounted injuries he'd treated in patients who claimed Stone or his thugs had assaulted them. Mrs. Palmer tearfully confirmed that Stone leveraged her debts to force Estelle into marriage. A few allies of the former mayor attempted to defend him, but their arguments faltered under cross-examination. especially when shown the documents Stone had forged to claim the Lakota's land. Rising Hawk, though not directly testifying since Barlow wanted to keep the hearing within local jurisdiction, observed with unwavering intensity. By noon, it was all but certain Stone would be found guilty. His outbursts only sealed the deal. Barlow announced a verdict, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and attempted forced marriage. While the official sentence would be handed down by a higher court, Stone would remain imprisoned until he was transported to the territorial prison. The roar of approval from townspeople erupted the moment Barlow rapped his gavel. Mayor Griffith stepped forward, disclaiming the old administration's sins, pledging that Riverbend would walk a different path. Now, in the afternoon session, Barlow turned his attention to the broader petition about the railroad. Representatives from the Lakota Band, including Rising Hawk, addressed the assembly with Estelle translating. They highlighted the significance of their seasonal hunting routes, their treaty rights, and the peaceful trade that once flourished. Many locals nodded, remembering older times before Stone sowed discord. Surprising unity emerged. Ranchers acknowledged they'd do better cooperating with the Lakota than forcing them off the land. Merchants realized that Lakota trade, especially in hides and crafts, could boost the local economy. The petition took shape, demanding that the territorial government respect the original treaties and reconsider any northern route that threatened to displace the Lakota entirely. Judge Barlow, though cautious about overstepping his authority, endorsed sending a dual delegation, 2 from Riverbend, 2 from the Lakota, to deliver the petition to the capital. Rising Hawk and Estelle volunteered readily, while the town selected Sheriff Dalton and Dr. Fowler to represent their interests. We can gather signatures from other settlements on the way. Estelle suggested, if people see how we stand together, it might sway the officials. Applause greeted the plan. A newfound sense of hope, if tenuous, filled the town hall. When the session ended, Stone Bear approached Rising Hawk with a faint grin, reporting that no trouble had arisen in the crowd. Evening Star, who had come to witness the trial, beamed at Estelle, then teased Rising Hawk about traveling so far with the teacher. The war chief only gave a stoic shrug, but Estelle caught the warmth in his eyes, remembering the small, carved token of clasped hands he'd once given her. They were forging a path that just weeks ago had seemed unimaginable. After the excitement, Estelle stepped outside into the golden afternoon light, heart throbbing with relief and expectation. She spotted Mrs. Palmer across the street, hurrying over with tears in her eyes. They embraced. You're leaving again, aren't you, Mrs.? Palmer asked. Estelle nodded. For a time, but I promise to return whenever possible. I want to see the difference we're making here, and I want to keep bridging these worlds. That evening, a modest celebration took place in the new town hall, with local fiddlers playing a lively tune. Estelle danced with Rising Hawk, an unthinkable scenario. Mere weeks before, the townsfolk watched with curiosity, some with outright approval, others with polite puzzlement. In that swirl of laughter, music, and improbable unity, it felt as though Stone's shadow had lifted. Of course, the railroad still loomed and war threatened in the Western Territories, but for a brief, shining moment, Riverbend savored a peace few would have predicted. Under the starlit sky, Estelle and Rising Hawk walked along the boardwalk by the old store, chatting in quiet tones. She confessed her lingering fears about the capital's reception and the unstoppable forces of expansion. He responded that no path through change was easy, but that stepping forward together gave them strength neither had alone. With that simple, shared understanding, they prepared to depart, carrying the hopes of Riverbend and the Lakota camp on their shoulders, forging a new story on the wild frontier, one where an unlikely alliance born of necessity might endure against all odds. Looking back on Estelle's journey from captive bride to cultural bridge reveals how courage can blossom in the direst circumstances. With Rising Hawk's timely intervention, she found not only freedom, but also a deeper calling as a teacher and mediator between two worlds long at odds. Their shared resolve shattered old prejudices in the frontier settlement, showing that unity can take root even where mistrust once dominated. Though fresh challenges loom the railroad's relentless push, political scheming far beyond their control, Estelle's story proves that standing together, forging relationships built on honesty and respect, can outshine fear. In my view, this ending reminds us that the greatest frontiers are often within ourselves. Open minds and open hearts can conquer far more than force alone. What do you think? Share your reactions or questions down in the comments. We'd love to hear how this story speaks to you. And remember to stay subscribed so you never miss another thrilling adventure we have in store. Together, let's keep the spirit of hope alive.